welcome back to What Are You Reading? A podcast with the Public Library of Mount Vernon in Knox County. I'm Christy.
And I'm Katie.
And today we are joined by Dean Abbott, who is an author, also a staff member. He's at the Fredericktown Community Library.
I am.
Thank you for joining us today. We're happy to have you.
Thank you.
So today we're going to be talking about Dean's new book, Common Good, Reflections on Everyday Vices and Virtues. This is going to be in our collection very soon, so be on the lookout for that. We kind of wanted to just talk about the book, kind of let people know what inspired you and why they should pick it up.
Well, what inspired me, I've been interested in philosophy at some level since I was about 16. I remember my sophomore year, I thought I wanted to write my research paper on solipsism, which is the idea that nothing but the mind exists. Okay. And fortunately, my teacher, Mr. Dickin, had the good sense to tell me I couldn't do that. But over the years, I have really been interested in ethics, particularly in virtue ethics. And so what I've written here is, I guess I would say, popular level philosophy. I mean, if you say philosophy, people get intimidated. A lot of people get intimidated. But so what I've done is just written a book that is a series of reflections on what virtue is, what vice is, and then I think there are 8 total chapters on various what we might call character qualities, reflections on those. And then I end the book with a chapter on the connection between virtue and happiness. And so I think, ultimately the goal, I think, of the book is simply to help people think more deeply about their daily lives, but particularly to see how it is that by being mindful of their habits and choices, they move themselves toward greater fulfillment and happiness. And so it's really kind of a book that exists at this odd intersection of popular philosophy and almost a sort of a slight sprinkle of self-help in a way. Yeah. So there aren't that many books, I don't think, that exist in exactly that space. So.
Yeah, I did think that it was, I will say this, I thought it was very approachable. I graduated in 2009 from college, so it's been a while. I haven't revisited a lot of my philosophy books.
Right.
So at first I thought, but I thought it was extremely approachable, very relatable, and like you said, easily things that you can apply to your everyday life.
Yeah, and I think we should make clear too that it's not a book of academic philosophy. I mean, there are like professional academic philosophers out there. That's not what this is. I think there's 15 footnotes in the whole book, right? So it's not an academic book by any means. It's more like a series of personal reflections, I think, within the context of all of the reading I've done, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I took some notes. We were joking about this before we started our podcast. For every chapter, I kind of pulled something, almost every chapter, something that I thought was kind of interesting and I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about.
Okay, great.
We start out with understanding vice, and we kind of talked about what kind of inspired you to pick vice specifically. Is that something that...
Well, I'm going to sure I understand your question. See, that's the philosopher part.
That's the
what do you
philosopher
mean?
part, right? Like, we could go on.
Asking...
So what made you specifically look at, like, vices and virtues?
Well, because vices and in the book, I use a colloquial, a sort of more casual definition, right? So particularly in, like, the history of virtue ethics, beginning with Aristotle, and I say this in the book, Aristotle defines virtue as the mean between extremes, okay? And that's a fairly technical kind of thing within the tradition of virtue ethics, but in this book I simply mean virtue as something we mean more like a good habit or a good character quality, right? And particularly what I say in the book is I just define vices simply as habits that impede your growth toward fulfillment and happiness, and virtue as those which encourage it. And so when we talk about vice and virtues with regard to this book, like I said, more casually than I might if we were talking in more precise philosophical terms. I just mean things that are good for you and things that are bad for you, right? Particularly like character qualities that are good for people to cultivate in the sense that they make them more content and fulfilled versus those that make them more angry, unhappy, whatever, confused.
Yeah, and I did notice that with especially chapters like gossip.
I do have a chapter on gossip. I'm against it.
I thought it was, there were quite a few things that you mentioned, repeatedly indulging in it kind of grows that resentment, it's a harmful behavior.
Right.
So I thought quite a few chapters, things that you said on fearfulness also, living in fear. These are things that I definitely applied. After I read that, I stopped to think about it, really meditate on
that
this.
That was my goal.
Yeah, and I think did a great job with this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I also wanted to talk about sober-mindedness.
Oh, yes.
This was new to me.
Okay.
So, the mature ability to assess the meaningfulness of events and respond with the appropriate level of meaningful action. Do you want to go into a little bit more detail of...
All right. Well, it's interesting. This book was a 2-year process, right? So it was 2 years from the time that I was awarded the contract till the day it arrived at my house. And so when you're writing a book and it takes a long time, then you do talk about it afterward, and you're talking about something that you wrote 2 years ago. So let me see what I can remember. I think, without looking up the definition precisely of what I meant, I just mean that sober-mindedness is this, it's the ability, but also more than that, even the desire to take the gift of life seriously, right? And and because of that, to make an effort to understand the meaning of events and to respond to that meaning in a way that's appropriate. And so I think that is a character quality that's often quite lacking in our contemporary culture. And I have some examples in the book of I compare it in the book to frivolousness, right? Which is a kind of an almost unwillingness to take the gift of life seriously. And so to respond to every situation with flippancy or irony or just even a kind of shallow self-indulgence, as opposed to responding to the situations that life presents in a way that elevates the situation around you, because you are responding to it at the deepest level of its meaning.
Yeah, it definitely came. It was interesting to me specifically, I think, because I'm seeing a lot of that with the attachment to, say, modern technology. So cell phones, tablets, constantly being detached to where what's happening out here doesn't seem to have the kind of impact anymore. Everything feels kind of flat. So trying to be present and have meaningful interactions with people seems to be getting more difficult.
Yeah, that's my impression for some people. Again, it's a little bit hard to generalize because it depends on what you're doing on your phone. But I think if the majority of probably people you see walking around on their phone or playing Candy Crush or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so, we have this sort of trend of self-isolating and sort of becoming these atomized individuals who literally just exist in this like 18 inches of space. And so in terms of sober-mindedness, I'm not sure how that even begins to cultivate a sense of the seriousness of life or anything else, if in fact you dissipate your energy all day, every day through some kind of frivolity.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a dangerous thing in our culture to be anti-frivolity.
Yes.
Yeah.
So true. Getting closer to the end of the book, we do have the chapter on friendliness, which also very interesting that you said friendliness is the antidote to our loneliness.
I think so.
And kind of having that positive, affirmative relationships, how important those are, which kind of leads into what we were talking about. Having these personal connections are extremely important today, and I thought that was just really interesting, saying that that's the antidote to loneliness.
Yeah, well, obviously the antidote to loneliness is connection and relationship, right? And I think in that particular chapter, what I'm trying to do is to talk about how friendships, right, are the outworking of an inner pattern of virtue, right? I mean, if you think about that, right? I mean, what kind of people do you want to be friends with? You want to be friends with people who are consistent. You want to be friends with people who are respectful. You want to be friends with people who are energetic. I mean, whatever it is. I think in the book I think there's actually a sentence in the book, but I wrote it almost 2 years ago. But if I can remember, I think I said something in the book like, no one ever thought to himself, the people I'm with are too kind. I wish I could spend my time more with people who are self-centered, depressive, negative, and rude. Right? No one ever says that, and no one ever thinks about why we don't say that, right? And it's because while we are, as human beings, sometimes reluctant to want to cultivate virtue in ourselves, we always are eager to cultivate it in the people around us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so part of the way that we know that virtue is even a real thing is that we all so much desire it in other people. Right?
Yes.
Right? Because if it weren't real, I mean, if kindness or friendliness or cheerfulness weren't real things, we wouldn't desire them in other people. And so we only pretend they're not real when we have to apply them to ourselves.
Very good point. Yeah, you're right. Exactly right. Valdine, that was the questions we had for you. I really enjoyed the book and definitely recommend it. Like I said, guys, this is going to be in our collection very soon. Common Good, Reflections on Everyday Vices and Virtues by Dean Abbott. Definitely be on the lookout for this. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Great.
And join us next time. As always, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. We'll be back next month with more great books.